Welcome back, everybody, to the Stay Spicy podcast. This season, we are busting myths and challenges related to leadership. And in the last episode, we talked about some of the concerning stats and trends and bullshit myths surrounding the topic of leadership. How are you doing today, Lynette?
Damn right we did.
Yep.
Doing awesome. I mean, we hear from a lot of people struggling under the terror of a terrible boss. I've been there a time or two or three or four myself. Let's say I have the same luck with bosses as I tend to with relationships. So lots of content for this episode.
Oh, well, people say, people quit bosses, not jobs. Well, that's definitely true. We talked about that in the first episode. So today we're going to dive a little bit into what makes a very bad boss. We like to refer to them as bossholes, bad bosses. For me, it's, no authenticity, no recognition, no transparency. That's a bosshole. It's tough out there right now.
Yep. I mean, Sherry and I, we've talked about this before the podcast, and we've both had our share of bad bosses, and as have all of you, I'm sure. We've learned a lot, though, along the way. So that's what we're going to share with all of you here today, is our learnings from bad bosses, or bossholes, as Sherry said. So, one thing that we want to acknowledge as well, because we talked a little bit about being afraid to talk about this topic, because we're encouraged not to, right? There's a fear put into people about if you talk about a bad experience or something like that's gonna impact you. We're not about calling out people. We're about calling out behavior. And I think it's important to have these conversations about what's happening in the workplace and what is extreme and, what is not, and what to do with all of that.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel a little bit nervous talking about it, talking about bad experiences, talking about bad bosses, bad clients, you name it, because there's sort of that kind of, well, you might need something, you might need a reference, it's not that bad. You're moving on, and just, roll with the punches, take it on with you to your next, take it as an experience. And I do feel like we need to talk about it because we have to do something about it. And there are bossholes everywhere, and people are dealing with them every day. So we have to talk about the tips and tricks. We have to talk about the types of bosses, because we can't talk about good leadership without talking about leadership. Right?
Nice. I love that. Oh, leadership. That's going to be a t-shirt.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking of t-shirts, as I put on I have a no assholes policy today, I think we need to add to our merch store, I have a no bossholes policy. Although I don't think people will feel comfortable wearing that at work, but I still think people need a mug or a t-shirt that says I have a no bossholes policy. So that's on my list of things to do, and leadership. So back to this whole being afraid to talk about it. I think that part of the secrecy and the hiding this stuff is part of what's perpetuating this leadership crisis, or leadership crisis that we're in. And so it is important for us to call out the behavior and talk about some examples. And I have a lot of people come to me with these situations, and I've been in them myself. And we tell ourselves things like, it's not that bad, or you know what, I'll just get through it, or wait for that person to get fired, because somebody this crazy has got to get fired, right? Wrong. And so all of these things we tell ourselves don't help. And so what we wanted to do with today's episode about bossholes is actually give you some tools that may help you, hopefully. And we want to keep this conversation going as well. And so first, let's define what a bosshole is, because some people might not have heard this term. I hope you love this term, because I do. And no, it is, yes, it's a made up word, but no, we didn't make it up. Although I think we wish we did. It's been around, but it's not in the dictionary yet. That's a goal, to get that in the dictionary. Basically, a bosshole, we're not talking about your run of the mill, incompetent, annoying, or past your best before date boss. It's a bosshole is like a whole other level, whole other category of boss. And how we kind of define a bosshole is somebody who creates an extremely toxic environment that has negative effects on people's mental and physical health. And so that's more than just a difficult boss. This is something that's tends to be toxic and abusive.
And these are the ones that stand out, right?
Yeah.
So you can think about your whole career. For me, particularly early in my career, there are definitely a few boss holes that will just really take the cake and really stand out. So you remember a boss hole, and it really changes the way you view leadership. We talk about, managers are not leaders, leaders and managers. Yeah, these are the managers that are the boss holes and not the leaders. So
yeah, they're people managers, not people leaders.
No.
And like you said, they tend to leave a lasting impact even after you've left that job or they've left that job. There's almost like a boss hole hangover you get that affects you in your future workplaces. The other thing I want to acknowledge about boss holes is that boss holes often have a total lack of self-awareness of their boss holeness. So we're making up new words now. So these are the people who you'll find will say, I love it when people challenge me and I need feedback. But those are the exact same people who will then systematically shut down anyone who dares to question them. Yeah. I actually have a lack of self-awareness boss hole example. I had this new boss start, and week 1 on the job, he gave everybody on the executive team a leadership book. I think it was by Patrick Lencioni or something. And the book wasn't the issue, although that's a weird thing to do. But he basically said, this is my leadership Bible. And then he ended up being the worst boss I've ever had and violated any of the things. So this is the thing with boss holes too, is they can read all the books, take all the courses, say all the things, but never live it. So what we're calling out is actually that's why we're not calling out people, we're calling out behaviors.
Right.
Because your actions speak louder than your words.
Yeah. And from the perspective of somebody who was a staffer, I have taken leadership training, and the fact that the higher you go in leadership positions, and this is research has defined this, you become less and less aware. It was actually a massive component of the course because there was so much research on the lack of awareness of senior leaders. And so they had to call it out and make sure that if you are going to develop yourself as a leader, self-awareness is going to be everything because it is very scarce at the top level. And I guess that's just because people agree with you, right?
Yep.
When you're in levels of positional authority. So I'm not surprised that you received that Bible and
I kept it.
None of the scriptures were followed.
I kept it as a reminder too. It's in my bookshelf, and every time I look at it, I think of that person and their leadership. Yeah.
Oh, too bad there was a fire ban this summer.
Oh no, I burned some shit this summer. We'll talk about that later. So we talked about the boss holes probably have a lack of self-awareness.
Right.
But you probably know if you have a boss hole. You probably have a hunch. But just in case, we're going to give some symptoms to help you with your diagnosis.
Yeah, we are definitely going to diagnose the boss holes today. So first
boss hole
one,
behavior, I guess.
Yeah, we've got some quick and dirty names for them that they deserve. And we're going to start off with what we call Jekyll and Hyde. So that's the type of boss hole I've had. So Jekyll and Hyde's, all sunshine and roses managing up, total shit coming down. So these people subscribe to positional authority. They love to look really good with the higher ups. They love to suck up to them. And they are always putting the pressure down on their staff. They're not respectful of their staff's time. They use all of the resources of their teams to build themselves up. So I do not enjoy those people. And I find it really funny because it makes no business sense. Not only are you a bad human being, but that is stupid business sense because people move around and you don't know who you're going to be working for one day. I am aware of a woman who was amazing and she worked for a team that bullied her. They didn't like her. They didn't like her ideas. And this person was very intelligent. She had new, bright ideas. The team didn't like it. They were intimidated by it. So they bullied her because they wanted her to quit. She basically left the position and came back 6 months later in an executive role in the same organization that these people were reporting up to. So they were scared shitless because, they had been bullying her and they had been, really nice to the managers, really nice to everybody, not great to her. And here you are working for that person. So it's interesting to me that people would do that, that they would hurt others and then not realize that, hey, I might be on a boardroom table with that person someday, or word gets around, or like I said, I'm a millennial and I change jobs every 3 years. So I'll see you again. I'll see you again.
Sounds like a threat.
Yeah. I'll see you, Hyde.
Yeah. And it's like, it's kind of Jekyll and Hyde is similar to that whole like shit rolls downhill kind of mantra.
Yep.
So I had another kind of version of Jekyll and Hyde. So it could be not just sunshine up. It could be 1 minute they are everybody's best friend or pretending to be.
Yep.
So I had people tell me about a boss that would walk around and like ask people about their weekends and try to be buddy. But nobody was ever comfortable when this person was in the office because every team meeting was described as like a Hunger Games lottery of who was going to be called out and mocked and belittled in front of everybody. And when something would go wrong, this person would just snap. Right. So there was an instance where someone got yelled at to the point of having a panic attack and they had to call the ambulance. And then later in a leadership team session, this boss referred to that incident and kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, well, sometimes the boss has to yell. No, the boss never has to yell. So you can ask people about their weekend and do all the pleasantries, but then if you turn around and, in team meetings or in other instances, treat people like crap, then nobody ever knows which version of you they're going to get. No. And if somebody keeps you guessing like that, so basically if somebody yells at you, belittles you, or keeps you guessing, they're a bosshole.
Yep. Great definition there. Who's next? What's next?
One is liar, liar. There's a lot of like, I was just going to call out us being millennials. A lot of our references are like millennial movies and songs.
I love that movie.
That is the best movie. Total sidebar. Yes.
Oh my God.
I think it's Jim Carrey's best movie. So Liar, Liar is the next bosshole. Actually, that movie is probably a good indication of bosshole.
Yes.
Okay. So Liar, Liar. I have had several bosses who would say one thing to my face and then do the opposite.
Right.
I've had a lot of experience with that. Sometimes it presents itself as like a reorg. So somebody will reassure you, oh, this isn't going to affect you, or you'll get this position, and then they turn around and you find out from someone else that it's the total opposite.
They're trying to get you out of their hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another example is like when I would talk to a boss about things that they were doing that maybe were not ideal or above board, or ask them to stop. Even if I would bring evidence saying somebody mentioned this to me, and they would totally deny it. Like, okay, but this person said it.
Right.
Or I have an email, and they'd say, no, that never happened. I think they call that gaslighting, actually.
Yes.
Or you would say, you've been undermining me to my own staff. Can you please stop doing that? And they would say, oh yeah, no, absolutely. And then they would keep doing it. So anytime a boss is basically lying or saying one thing and doing another, that's that example. So I think, Sherry, you also talked about not just lying, but like withholding information from people and this sort of culture of secrecy.
Yeah. So lying by way of dishonesty. Mm-hmm. So just I've worked with organizations where people always held information very close and were afraid to share information, even if it meant a more productive team, and even if it meant a more engaged team. To me, that's a very toxic behavior, even though people sometimes aren't conscious of it. So I've worked in workplaces where previously people had been fired because they couldn't quickly articulate what it was their value was. And that was sort of a system. And so people who were more senior than me had taken that perspective and those habits with them, and therefore were, trickling that down onto new staff, trickling that down onto their teammates. Because if your boss is withholding things and showing that that's the way to show your value, then, you see staff doing that. So that was something that I noticed and something that I didn't understand, because not only is that a toxic behavior, but that really affects the productivity of a company. But that's kind of like the whole idea of the fish rots at the head, right? So you're starting to keep information, and then other people start keeping information, and then it just keeps trickling down, and then nobody shares anything. And then like, what are you supposed to do? So liar, liar, right? Like, it may not seem like an outright lie, but it's creating a culture of lying and keeping things and holding things close, which is never a good thing.
So if your boss says one thing but does another, if they lie, if they gaslight you,
Yep.
or if they withhold information, they are a boss hole.
Bossholes. Next one, Slim Shady.
Another
Love that
millennial
name. I love it. Another 90s reference. So I've actually had experiences where I've been asked to delete emails or change advice to the advice the person wanted, which to me is super shady. Another thing that I've experienced is by a boss hole is picking winners and losers. Sometimes that is just, picking favorites, but also sometimes it's sexism. So I had to sit through a job interview where my boss at the time said that we shouldn't hire a woman who was coming back from maternity leave because he didn't feel that she could do her job and raise a baby at the same time.
There's a lot of that.
And I just can't stop thinking about it. And every time I interview somebody now, I just think about that. Like, that just rings in my head about how we can just go in and just do something so shady. And there was another man there who was underqualified that was being interviewed that he thought we should hire.
So basically, if your boss asks you to break the rules or compromise your ethics, guess what? They're a boss hole.
Exactly. And you know what? They're doing it because they want you to be an accomplice some of the time.
Or throw you under the bus.
Right.
Scapegoat, maybe not even an accomplice.
So just don't walk in there. Like, don't even do it. A professional, Yeah, no, for sure.
The next boss hole behavior is the green-eyed monster. I've had a little bit of experience with this.
Go ahead.
Oh, man. How do we even talk about this? So, I mean, it's kind of obvious. I think when we say green-eyed monster, it's somebody who either is jealous of you, who wants the spotlight, who wants to shove you into the background, who's threatened by something about you. But it's not just that they have those feelings, it's how they act on them. So somebody who actively discredits you. I had one person talk to me about how her boss would not let her speak for her own work. He insisted on speaking for it. And I'm sure we've all had those bosses where, they tell us our ideas are shit, but then when they work out, they're happy to take credit for them.
Yeah.
And I've had bosses that didn't like how visible I was, and they actively would try to scale back my profile or marginalize me, and even just talk bad about me as well. So
right.
This whole notion of if somebody is taking credit for your work, or they're actively trying to diminish you or marginalize you, that's out of this sense of feeling of threat or envy. That's the green-eyed monster.
Yeah. And I think from a professional communicator role, the profile of your entire organization is the future. So not only are you introducing people who will be the future leaders, there's statistical evidence that having an engaged staff on LinkedIn is good for the brand. Having an engaged leadership team is good for the brand. 44%, right? Of our people are 44% more likely to engage with a brand if the senior leaders are out there and they're talking and they're doing that. I don't just want to hear from one person. I want to hear from people of color. I want to hear from your people and culture. I want to hear from all aspects of the organization. And that's just where it's going. So if your boss tries to minimize or marginalize you or take credit for your work or ideas, they are a boss hole.
Boss hole.
Boss hole. Next one. Gossip Girl. Another reference. I think it's 2000s though. It's a millennium one.
Yeah, we'll just call them millennial references.
So that's the one that needs
generation.
information, right? Like, and you don't even know why. So I have actually been asked to spy on a colleague and report back. That happened to me once, and I shut it down, and I told the person right away.
That's a good response. But being asked to do that is insane.
I was uncomfortable. Like, I really was. But also a little bit creeped out.
I know other people have been asked to do the same thing.
Well, the amount of social media creeping out there is getting out of hand.
There are some people in an organization that are like spending their time creeping other people's LinkedIns and are being told to do that. So like, that's not part of your job to spy on other people.
No.
Report to the boss about what they're posting on social media or what they're doing or what they're saying.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
You know right away that's not in your job description.
Yep. I had, so similarly when it comes to gossip,
right.
So that could be one aspect of a boss engaging in that kind of gossip culture. Another one would be when they're more active, like more direct about it. I had a boss who would call us up, various staff, just to talk shit about other staff and even stakeholders. And then would actively try to pit people against each other by saying like, this person said this about you. And this person didn't know, this boss didn't know that we would all then report back to each other about what was being said.
Right.
And we knew, we could see it for what it was, but it creates this uneasiness. And there was a period of time where it worked, right? Where some people, that created rifts between people because they had believed what the boss said, you know, if the boss says it. So the boss themselves was actively gossiping about people. I've also had a boss even go to the extent of like creating rumors about me and talking bad about me. And so all of this kind of behavior that you wouldn't want to see from your colleagues, I think it's so much worse when the boss does it. And it's really damaging. It creates this feeling of intense unsafety.
Well, and in Bosshole land, there's, you know, there's often you'll notice that they'll try to find the person that will get them that information, like a favorite or a lackey or whatever. And I ain't no rat, so I don't participate, but
I'm going to get you shirt. I ain't no rat.
Yeah. Keep Alberta rat free. I have a tale of two bosses. So one boss did select, hired somebody that they'd worked with before. And that person would literally go into the boss's office at the end of the day and just gossip and tell them everything that was happening, talking about different staff members. Very strange. But I knew right away what was going on. And then people started to kind of catch on. And then I had another boss who was amazing. And she, the first day she started, we had a meeting and she laid out her expectations. And I have never to this day seen a boss do this. She said to everybody on the team, we don't talk about each other behind our backs. We don't gossip about each other. We're teammates. If we have something, we talk to each other and we communicate that. She was like, will not tolerate gossip. And she's not a bosshole. She's amazing. But yeah, you really, like I said, fish rots at the head. I know I'm East Coaster, so I use a lot of fish references, but that is it, right? So, you know,
so if your boss gossips to or about you, because that's the other thing too, right? If a boss is gossiping to you about other people, like I always think back to what my mom said, if they're gossiping to you, they're gossiping about you. So if your boss gossips to or about you, if they spread rumors, they try to pit people against each other, they are a bosshole.
Yeah, that's right.
The next one is, I think, a super prevalent bosshole behavior.
Yeah.
Because I think it's just indicative of an old style of leadership and what people think being a boss is. It's called fearmonger. So like I actually had somebody say to me yesterday that their boss told them, you know, you have to be an asshole to get just a basic level of work out of people. I was like, no, you don't.
You absolutely don't.
You do not. That is actually the worst way to motivate people.
Those are the words of someone who is not respected.
Yes.
Because they did something and they effed up and they're not respected. And now they have to be jerks and go do whatever they need to do to get the job done because people don't like you.
I actually had a boss say to me, I'd rather be feared than respected.
How's that going?
Yeah. How's that working for you? I mean, they're super feared, but I don't think it's necessarily working.
No.
But whether it's working or not, that is toxic boss behavior.
Yeah.
So I also, same boss said to me that they fired people to send a message to the rest of the team. Yeah, sends a message, all right.
And what was that message?
I'm coming for you.
I'm coming for you. Find another job and leave me hanging.
Yeah. And so a totally different boss also used fear in a different way. So this whole, like, I think the most prevalent kind of fear monger boss whole behavior is the fear of being fired, right? I once had a boss call me up screaming at me in the middle of the night. This was over a decade ago. And because there was an article in the paper about our organization, and it just stated fact that we weren't able to help this one person because it wasn't in our mandate. It was true. But she didn't think it was favorable to her or something like that. So she said I had to call up the editor and get a retraction. So I explained that there was all the reasons you would normally get a retraction didn't apply here. So I couldn't really in good conscience do that. And she's like, do it or don't come into work tomorrow. I was like, and I mean, how do you, that notion of fear, that same boss also would punish me by using the silent treatment, which is just a whole other level of bizarre.
Sounds like a marriage. A bad one.
A bad one. I was like, yeah. So this whole notion of using fear and creating this sense of fear of getting fired,
right,
to sort of control your people. That's a fear monger.
Well, and I think it's the idea, and in my experience, fear is always used to get people to do what you want. So like I said, when I had a boss that said I was too young to move into management, what they were really saying was, I can't afford for you to leave right now. So I'm going to make you feel scared and stupid and everything else so that you will stay right where you are.
Yep.
And then I've had, great bosses who have said, you know what, I could see that happening for you. Here's how you get to where you want to be.
Whether it's here or somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting when you see that dynamic. I also find the fear is often used because of incompetence. So the fear is often described as pressure coming from the higher ups. Seen that a lot too. It's like, no, that's not pressure coming from the CEO's office. The CEO is actually pretty calm. That's you because you screwed up something and didn't get the brief, and now you're just freaking out at your staff. So that kind of fear mongering too. It's like your emergency is always everyone else's fear. And I don't enjoy that. So
nope.
Yeah. So if your boss is constantly trying to instill fear in you, trying to manipulate you using that fear, they are a bosshole.
Yep.
There's a lot of indicators of the types of bossholes. And, we want to hear from our listeners too about their experiences with bossholes.
Yeah.
And
don't name names. Don't get yourself fired. But just tell us your examples.
Don't name names. We didn't name names. Name behaviors though, because I kind of want to know what the red flags are for you and how you dealt with it.
Actually, it's like dating right now. I'm learning red flags. And so you have to do the same. Relationships are relationships, right? So learn the red flags when it comes to bosses and because that's a relationship too. And it's one that you have to spend a lot of time with.
Exactly. So Lynette, let's talk about we've defined what a bosshole is. They have 100 names and 100 faces. How do we survive them?
Well, let's recap quickly on behaviors. We've got, if they create a culture of fear, they're a bosshole. If they lie, they're a bosshole.
Right.
If they spread rumors and gossip, they're a bosshole. If they belittle you or marginalize you, they're a bosshole. The first one was if they show you one face one moment and another face another, then
Jekyll and Hyde,
they're a bosshole.
Yeah.
So, and we talked in the beginning about there's a difference between a difficult boss and a bosshole, right? So you're not always going to like your boss, and that's okay. No. Sometimes you're just like, oh, I don't like the cut of this guy's jib, or she's really annoying. That's not a bosshole situation. We're talking about true toxic behavior. And so if you do have a bosshole, first thing we want to say is you should get out of there as soon as possible, because nobody should stay in an abusive or toxic environment if they can help it. But here's the thing. What if you can't just quit your job? Because realistically, not everybody can just up and quit their job. financially, practically. What if you reported the behavior, which is another course of action you can take, but it's taking time for that to take its course. The other thing too is when you report the behavior, these investigations or processes don't always end or work out the way you hope they will.
No.
So in the meantime, we've got a few survival tips that we've come up with. And if you find yourself in this position, the first is, and this is one I came up with kind of recently, for a mentee of mine, and I kind of road tested it myself for a little while, is treat it as transactional. Now, normally, like we talked, I think in the last episode about, we want people to be fully present, fully in and committed.
Right.
And you don't want people to treat your job just as a, as a check mark. But if you have a boss hole situation, that is a different story altogether. So somebody was telling me about her boss, and she was saying, she's just such a terrible leader. And I said, I'm going to stop you right there. She's not a leader. She's your boss. And so stop trying to get from her what you would try to get from a leader. Think about, she's just your supervisor. What do you ultimately need from a supervisor or people manager? You need direction, clear direction, and approvals. That's it. That's all. So don't try to get guidance or recognition or any kind of other support mechanism that you would normally expect from a leader from your boss hole. So treat it as that relationship of transactional. Here's what I need from you. I need clear direction. Get it in writing and get approvals for what you need sanctioned and do your work. And so then if they're giving you shitty feedback and things like that, don't take it to heart because they're not actually your leader and the feedback is not relevant, which actually leads us into the next coping mechanism.
Yes. So I want everyone to take a pen or a Sharpie or a piece of chalk and write this down. Mm-hmm. Feedback is data, not a decision. And we talk about this a lot at Stay Spicy because everyone has opinions and you obviously don't want to take advice from people you wouldn't trade places with, which is your boss hole. We talk about your Post-it people, the people that you really respect, the people that are your mentors, the people that you would ask questions about yourself and you would want to get honest, constructive feedback from. Now, these are the people you want to talk to and get feedback from, even if it's a colleague that works in the same place that you trust. But then you have the crabs. You have the people trying to pull you down. You have the people trying to manipulate you, the people trying to yell at you. We have the fear mongers. So we talk about the boss holes. You need to know what is constructive, actionable feedback and what is just bullshit or manipulation and what's just a random opinion. You can't take all of the information, right? So you've got to take the data, filter it through, and figure out what's actionable and what makes sense for you. So Lynette had a little bit of a litmus test here. So you've given me 3 things to think about when we determine what's data and what to do with the feedback. Is the source credible? I mean, is it coming from somebody who really cares about you and has your best interest at heart? Is that information relevant? Is it relevant to your role? Is it relevant to the organization? Or is it just like a personal attack on you that's trying to send you into a spiral, right? Which isn't fair. And is this actionable or constructive feedback? So, is it framed in a way that you can do something with it? And I think when we say, feedback's data, not a decision, we really want people to start thinking about opinions. Opinions are overrated. Who matters, who doesn't, and what information you're going to take to make yourself better and protect yourself.
I think some people also, the term constructive feedback is misused because people use constructive feedback as synonymous with negative feedback.
Right.
That's not constructive feedback. Constructive feedback is the reason it's constructive is exactly as you said. It's something that you can actually action or do something about. If it's like, oh, you're a little too loud, that's not constructive. Actually, something somebody said to me, which one time was, I hear that you're just all about yourself. What the hell am I supposed to do with that?
And who else are you supposed to be about?
Yeah, there's that. So with those questions Sherry put out, if the answer is no to any one of them, you can just toss that feedback in the garbage where it belongs.
Yeah.
The next kind of coping mechanism, survival tip is and actually I rejected this one at first, so I will acknowledge that if you hear this, you're probably going to be like, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Is learn from it and become a good leader yourself. So I was struggling with a boss hole, and I had somebody say, I've learned you can learn a lot from a bad leader. And I was like, bullshit, you can. I was like really mad about it. I rejected it. Like, you can't learn anything from a bad leader. But I have to admit they were right. I started reflecting on like the few good leaders I had and what I learned from them. And then things started coming up from the bad leaders and stuff that I learned from them. You have to dig a little deeper and maybe think about it in a different way. But you can learn a lot about yourself. You can learn some about being a good leader. I think this is where I would maybe reframe it. Maybe you can't learn how to be a good leader from what not to do of a bad leader, but you can learn a lot about yourself. So that's
a really good point.
I wrote down some examples because, again, if you're like me and you're a total skeptic, you're like, this is crap. So here's some things that I wrote down, and I would encourage people to do the same thing. We're all about journaling. So if you have a bad leader, or even go back and think of some of your good leaders, write down some of the things you're learning. But try to think about it in a constructive way, not just like I learned that people are assholes.
Right.
But here, for example, the constant violation of my boundaries finally pushed me to learn to stand up and speak up for myself. So that's something I learned how to do, but also the value of doing it. That you're the only one who can set and enforce boundaries. You can't expect people to be like, oh, it's the weekend, I'll just not bother you.
Yeah.
The toxic work environment also taught me how to master self-care. The culture of fear taught me the importance of and how to create psychological safety for others. So that's the other thing too, is like, notice how you're responding to this work environment. And then also my boss hole, who treated people like numbers and widgets, reinforced my value as a people first leader. Yeah. So maybe that didn't teach me exactly how to become a good leader, but they taught me a lot of things about myself. And I just had to dig deep and think about it. So if you focus on what you can learn as a result of your boss hole's bad behavior, and you focus on this learning, it helps you change your perspective, and it kind of turns the boss hole from a predator into a project. And it can help you maybe emotionally separate a little bit from the boss hole.
Yeah, I love that quote. And that kind of brings us to the next piece of advice, which is really to stay true to yourself, right? It's hard to do that in a thrall of a boss hole. It's hard to do that when you're in a toxic work environment. You get caught up in the bubble and caught up in the swirl. So it is important, like you said, to take those nuggets of wisdom that you find within yourself and take those to the next level. And, it's important to stay grounded in your values no matter what. Because you are who matters in this situation, right? And your psychological safety, your health, and what you're going to do next. So, seeking support, you may need to seek outside support to deal with this, whether it's talking to a mentor or someone who's been in a situation like that before, whether that's counseling, resources, books, really great podcasts, or anything you might need to kind of remind you that you have what you need. And again, beware of those crabs, beware of those opinions, right? Navigate the feedback, keep a record, ensure that you're putting yourself and your health first. Self-care, like you said, important piece of that. And remembering that everything's temporary. Jobs are temporary. Boss holes come and go. They're going to be unhappy everywhere they go.
They won't be in your life forever.
They won't be in your life forever, and you will not be unhappy forever. So remembering that, right? And that relationship will sever. So
maybe for those who haven't listened to our Post-it People and Crabs episode, can you define Post-it People and Crabs for our new listeners?
If you want to listen to season 1, we have Post-it People versus Crabs. That's actually one of our most popular episodes. We do talk about differentiating between the good feedback and the bullshit.
Yep.
Your Post-it people, Lynette's my Post-it person.
Yeah.
We all have those people that we go to and rely on when we need something. And we need honest advice. So these are people that really care about you. And we have Post-it people in our family sometimes, Post-it people that are friends, Post-it people that are coworkers. They come from all walks of life, but we trust them. They trust us, and they have our best interest in mind. The crabs, I don't know what their motivations are. Sometimes they're negative. Sometimes they're trying to yank you down. Crabs in the bucket. So When a crab tries to crawl out of the bucket, the other crabs will just haul it down instinctively. That's the negativity. That's the trash can. You don't want to be wallowing in there. So stay away from the crabs that are going to pull you down.
And if you've got a boss hole,
Right.
chances are some good people in your organization may turn into crabs because everybody responds to toxicity and fear in different ways, right? So everybody's in survival mode, and it doesn't make them a bad person. It just makes them, that's their survival mode, right? It's fight, flight, or freeze. And being a crab is a survival mechanism. So on that note of survival, we call these survival tips because that's what it is. It's surviving, and that's not a healthy place to be. So this is really just temporary. We want this to be temporary for you because it's not sustainable. So our advice to you is focus on surviving in the short term, protect your mental health, your reputation, your physical health, and also focus on getting out as fast as possible. Focus on leaving and finding a place where you can thrive, not just survive. Use the knowledge that you gain from this situation to also avoid working for another boss hole if you can help it. So make sure, they always say interview your interviewer. Definitely do that. Ask things about culture. In a future episode, we're going to talk about culture killers. So be on the lookout for those culture killers, because chances are if there's culture killers in an organization, a boss hole's not far behind, because the fish rots from the head, as Sherry says. And also make sure that you join our community, because that's what this is all about. Learning from each other, supporting each other, and share some of your own survival tips in boss hole situations so that our community can benefit from them. And then, of course, I think I'm going to add a survival tip, which is buy some of our Stay Spicy merch, because there's something, and I've had people do that. There's something so cathartic about being able to carry around a I have a no assholes policy mug, or wear a cool enough to have a few haters t-shirt. And so you can express yourself in different ways and stay true to you and who you are in your own way, and share with us all of your tips and tricks. So until the next episode, we hope you all stay spicy.
And save your fucks for magical shit.